it, it will be muted.
Well, Naveen, it's 10:01. Should we start?
Yeah, we can. Yes, it's 10:01. And yes, Chris, please go ahead and start the webinar today. Topic is electronic logging devices, history and timeline. Today we will be discussing the ELD compliance mandate date, and does it need to be extended or not. So experts will discuss on the topic. Yes, please, Chris.
Welcome to the Trucking Network's webinar this morning. It's a weekly webinar that we have every Thursday. TTN hosts these every Thursday from 10 to 11. And today we have a very special topic. We have 3 guests and 2 topics for you: electronic logging devices, and then we're going to get into the trucking hard market. We have Mike Millian from the PMTC, and Andrea is joining us from the Petroleum Services Association. We'll get there in just a minute. I'm your host, Chris Harris, Safety Dog. John Oldfield will be talking about the trucking insurance and the hard market. We plan to have a Q&A at the end of each presentation. So if you would type your questions into the chat, we will then, Naveen will help us navigate the chat and keep track of those questions, and then I will ask them at the end of the presentation for each guest. In the chat, if you wanted the question to go to a specific guest, please indicate that for us. That would be awesome. Naveen, I'd love for you to say a few words.
Yeah, thank you, Chris, for the introduction, and would like to say thank you to each and everyone attending this webinar, and a special thank you to all our panelists and sharing their information, sharing their knowledge with our attendees. And it looks like going to be a great webinar today. We have good attendance. And as Chris mentioned, Trucking Network is a publication for trucking industry. We publish this magazine every month. For now, it's bi-monthly because of COVID restrictions, and it's bilingual. And we host these webinars, we host job fair events for the industry to support for their hiring needs. And today's webinar, which we will be going to talk about, is electronic logging. Me and Mike was talking for a few days that this is going to be a little bit late for the industry if the ministry is trying to mandate it that soon. So we decided to let's get together our experts and discuss on the topic. And other hot topic today will be John Oldfield from NFP will be discussing with us how the insurance market is working these days, what challenges and solutions are available there. Okay, Mike, if you would like to start the webinar, please.
Well, can we, just before we start with that, Naveen, can we have Andrea introduce herself?
Sure.
And then we'll get to Mike to introduce himself, and we'll get into ELDs. Andrea?
Sure, yeah, good morning. So I'm Andrea Hardy, and I'm currently the Director of Health and Safety with the Petroleum Services Association of Canada, or PSAC as we call it over here. PSAC is the National Trade Association for the service, supply, and manufacturing sectors within the Canadian upstream petroleum industry. In this role, I'm responsible for PSAC health and safety initiatives, as well as representing PSAC member interests in health, safety, and as well transportation issues fall under that spectrum as well. But I have a background in engineering, and prior to joining PSAC, my career has covered a number of leadership positions within the energy industry and with both the federal and Alberta provincial governments. So I'm located out here in Calgary. For those of you that are joining us from the West, shout out to you, but that's a quick intro of myself.
Thanks, Andrea. Mr. Mike.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Before I get started, I just want to thank Naveen and the Trucking Network for putting this webinar on and inviting me to speak about this topic today. Brief history of myself. I've got 30 years in the transportation industry. Started out as a driver at the age of 18. It doesn't seem like it was 30 years ago. When I look in the mirror, it looks like it was maybe more than 30 years ago. When I started out as a driver, did that for 8 years. Then I got into driver training, taught entry-level students how to drive a truck. From there, I went into safety and compliance training, which eventually moved me into safety and compliance and training manager and overseeing policies and procedures for companies in addition to the training programs with them. Started that out in a for-hire fleet. Then I went into the private fleet business for 12.5 years, managing the Hensel Co-op's fleet. I took on the role as the president of the PMTC in January of 2015. And have been here ever since. And the PMTC has been around since 1977, and we represent Canada's private and dedicated fleet internationally. With that, before we get into the moderated panel with Chris and Andrea and myself, I'm just going to give everybody on the call a brief history or timeline as to where ELDs are in Canada and as to how we got here. Current rules in Canada, there is no current hours of service regulations in the books for electronic recording devices that are in effect. They come into effect on June 12th, but currently all it says is you can use what we call an ERD, which is a device that has not been approved, as long as it captures the same data as a paper logbook. So basically you can have any electronic thing that you want right now, as long as it looks the same as a paper book, and it doesn't matter if it's connected. The regulation that was posted in Gazette 2 will come into effect on June 12th of 2021 for all federally regulated carriers and their drivers. When it will come into effect for carriers that are provincially regulated and don't travel outside their own boundaries is going to depend on each province and territory when and if they choose to enact the legislation. Federal one for anything over 4,500 kg, June 12th, 2021. The way it works in Canada, first thing they have to do is post the regulation in Gazette Part 1. When it's posted in Gazette Part 1, that's telling the industry, this is what we believe the regulation is going to be. That was done in December 16th, 2017. They then put a comment period on it, which in this case was 60 days, and that means anybody in the public can now read the regulation and comment on it. Once the comment period is over, TC pulls it down, and then they review all the comments and they prepare the draft and final legislation that is then put into effect for Canada Gazette Part 2. Once it's posted in Canada Gazette Part 2, that's telling you this is what the regulation is now going to be. The original posting in Gazette 1 did not require ELD devices to be certified by an independent third party. So they were going down the same route as the US, where they had a self-certification process where they had a list of specifications that you had to meet. And then the manufacturer basically submitted paperwork that said, yes, I tested myself, I'm certified, trust me, no need to check up on. That's what they did in the States, and that was the original proposal. After the Gazette 1 posting until we got into Gazette 2, there was quite a few changes, but the way that the data is transferred at the side of the road from the truck driver to the officer was changed, and it is now going to be encrypted for security, which they are still working on that process as well as where that encrypted security is going to be and go to. Roadside data transfer methods changed as well. In the original proposal, the device had to be able to transmit data by either email, USB, or Bluetooth. Sorry, not either. It had to transmit it by all three. Now it's only required to have email. The other two can still be on there as options if they want, but they're not legislative requirements anymore. And the view on the printout has changed. There's two different views now, basically because the one view makes it look like what a driver's logbook does. Makes it easy. The biggest change from Gazette 1 to Gazette 2, there were two big changes. The biggest one was the third-party certification process, which is now required. So any device in Canada that is going to be considered a legal ELD will have to be on a list that is going to be published by Transport Canada, listed as a certified electronic logging device that will be certified by an independent third party, which is the crux of our problem, which is why we're on our call today, or on this webinar. We are less than 11 months away from that deadline, and we still don't have a third-party certification body in place, let alone a certified device on the market. And we're going to get into that more a bit later, so I won't expand. And the other posting, the other big difference was in the original posting, CG1 posting, you had a 2-year compliance date, and then you had an additional 2-year grandfather period. And what that meant was, is if you had a device previously installed prior to the Gazette 2 posting, you would be given an additional 2 years to remove that device if it was not certified and replace it with the certified. And the reason for that was you've already invested into it, it's already integrated into your hardware and your systems. It's going to be a longer process to remove something that's already installed and replace it with a certified one than it is if you start from scratch. That was also removed, so there's now no grandfather period. 2 years for everybody, which means every federally regulated carrier is going to have to comply by June 12th of 2021 with a certified ELD. I believe everybody's going to get a copy of these slides. In these slides, if you click on these links, it will actually give you the Canada Gazette 2 standard that was posted in the National Safety. Exemptions, there's only 3 exemptions in Canada. You're operating under a permit, your engine year is previous to 2000, or if you've been operating under if you're operating under a rental agreement of no more than 30 days. Other than that, if you have to keep a logbook in Canada, which means you're traveling out of the 160 and you're federally regulated, you're going to have to apply. So with that, that's my introduction of the regulations. There's our contact info. I am going to stop sharing and I'm going to pass it over to Chris to begin the moderated session. So thank you.
Thanks, Mike. And I have to say that because I'm not in favor of an extension, I'm looking forward greatly to what you and Andrea have to share so that you can convince me that we need one. Being a safety guy, I really believe ELDs are necessary. So over the 13 months after the announcement was made, why are we still waiting for a certification body to be approved? And as a follow-up to that, how close are we to getting this approved?
You want me to start with that? Okay. So, I mean, first of all, I mean, I think you get into this question later on, but let me be clear as well. I'm fully in favor of ELD. Being in favor of ELDs and whether we need an extension or not are 2 different things. But why it took this long? A couple things. First of all, we went to a Gazette 1 posting not requiring a third-party certification. When the legislation was originally drafted, there was nothing in place for that. Through a lot of noise from our organization and some others, we finally convinced them to go over to third party, which I commend them on their part for making that change and recognizing it had to be done. But then the problem was, we go to a Canada Gazette 2 posting requiring a certified device, but we don't have anything in place at this point. We're already starting the clock ticking, but we don't have anything in place. Before you can certify a device, you have to certify an independent third-party testing body. And before you can certify an independent third-party testing party, you have to have testing procedures. We didn't have any of those. So the testing procedures had to be designed first. And they were a lot more thorough than a lot of people thought, I think. And the actual testing procedures were not finalized and in place till March, which means an independent third party could not even submit to be a testing body until March at the earliest, and most of them weren't ready in March because March is when they found out what the testing procedures were going to be. Then they had to make changes in their protocols to make sure they were going to be able to be approved if they submitted for the test. That's why it took it to this point. As to when we can expect to see the first one approved, the latest knowledge I've heard is we're probably not going to see our first independent third-party certification body in place until September, October. Just to get the certification body in place. Only then can a manufacturer submit to that third party to be approved. So if we don't have anybody in place till September, October, then the manufacturer has to submit. And then it's a 4 to 6 week process for the manufacturer to get approved, which means we are looking at October, November, possibly early December before we'll see the first certified ELD device in the market, if everything.
Andrea, do you have something to add to that?
Sure. Yeah, I think similar to Mike, the first thing that I just want to start out with is that PSAC is absolutely in favor of ELDs. And this is not a question of whether the regulation should be implemented or not, or what benefit we'll see from the addition of ELDs, but rather to address industry concerns around the implementation timeline. And really how we can move forward in successfully adopting these regulations for transportation safety. So I think in terms of why the delays and that as well, I think having spent several years working with the federal government, I'm familiar with the process of regulation development and implementation. And I think there are a number of sort of internal delays and reasons why that happens. But I also want to say that the challenges around COVID-19 have also, I think, contributed to some of these delays. Rightly so, as Transport Canada is focused on those immediate needs and that piece. But I certainly think that has also contributed to really moving ahead on this timeline as well in terms of getting the certification body established.
Thanks. And Andrea, since you're still on the mic, why do you feel an extension is required? How long of an extension, if the government were to grant one, would you like to see?
Sure, yeah. I think the delays in establishing an accredited certification body for ELDs is going to have a significant impact on that overall implementation strategy. So our members are eager to move forward in their efforts to meet that regulation, but they want to make sure that their investment in ELDs, they meet those certification requirements prior to making that significant investment. And it's going to take time for our members to research and purchase and install ELDs in their vehicles, then to test them to ensure that they're in compliance with the requirements. And then it's also going to take time to establish budgets, negotiate contracts for the installation and maintenance of all that equipment. So there's a significant period there and a number of actions that need to be taken. I think even if an announcement is made shortly that a certification body is established, we're talking another several weeks. Mike suggested 4 to 6 weeks or so before manufacturers are able, well, it'll be another several weeks before they're even able to submit their ELDs for review and approval. And then the certified ELDs are then available for purchase on the market. So I think it's PSAC's opinion that a compliance date should be at least 12 months from the date of an established accredited ELD certification body, and that would allow a time period to sort of adequately implement the system and meet those compliance requirements. I would also say that back in January, PSAC also submitted some letters to the federal minister and provincial ministers of transportation, asking questions just related to the operational policies and the enforcement of these ELD regulations. And the provinces at that time responded that they're still waiting for some guidance from the federal government on these issues, but had not received it at that time and have not yet to date received any specific information on that. And while that's a bit of a parallel issue to ELDs, understanding the operational policies and the enforcement of ELD regulations and having these policies and training in place, I think is also essential for a successful rollout of these regulations. And so it's important that this criteria is also well set out before that June 12th, 2021 deadline so that industry can prepare.
Thanks. And Mike, I'd ask you the same question. Why do you feel an extension is required, and if so, how long?
Yeah, well, first of all, let me speak. I came from a background where I actually transitioned a fleet into electronic logging devices way back in 2013. So the fleet I was operating at the time, that time we had 85 trucks. We put ELDs in. It took us roughly 12 months from the time I started to the time I finished. Researching multiple devices because I wasn't going to install the first device. I jumped, searched multiple devices, narrowed it down to 2. Ran trial with those two devices to see which one best operated within our fleet. Then made our decision to do the purchase. We get the hardware in. Now you have to schedule the installs in all your trucks. Now you have to train your IT staff. You got to train your dispatchers, your office people. And then last and most important, you have to train your drivers on how to properly operate. And you don't just turn it on in your entire fleet all at one time unless you want to have a massive headache. So you train a portion of your fleet. You turn it on in their trucks. You get them ready to roll. You see what problems they have. You refine your training to address the most common problems, and then you roll it out for another part of your fleet. This isn't something you do like that unless you want it to be chaotic and a bit of a mess within your own fleet. So right from day one, I told them that the PMTC's opinion was we need at least 12 months from when certified devices hit the market. So we can do our proper job and get it ready to go. And I was told that we would have a certification body in place by January of 2020, and we don't. So, and we're 7 months later and we don't, and we still don't have one. So, you know, I think the fact that timelines have not been met by whether TC thought they were going to be in industry, whatever those reasons are, should not be bared by the industry. You can't ask, in my opinion, you can't ask a fleet, go out, once you tell them a certification body is going to be in place and you have to have a certified device installed. Some fleets are going to wait until certified devices hit the market. And it's hard to blame them, especially if they've already purchased a device that they don't feel is going to be compliant now that the procedures are in. They did it 20 years ago. So if they're going to wait because you've told them there's going to be a certified device there, you can't punish them if the certified device isn't there until 6 months before the compliance date. So I think we have to have some give and take here. How long of an extension would we like to see? I'd like to see a year added on. Based on all the timelines that I'm hearing, if we, you know, first certified devices maybe are going to hit the market this fall, so that gives you a year and a half. And you know, it's not just us that are concerned with this. Think about the people south of the border, or people that operate south of the border. In December of 2017, the U.S. final rule, and you have to have an FMCSA certified device in your truck to operate into the United States, no matter where you're based. Okay, the self-certification model, and credit to Transport Canada for listening to the industry and going away from it. But to be blunt, is an unmitigated disaster. There's over 600 devices certified south of the border. As I tell everybody, if you think each one of them is actually a compliant device, it's bullshit. I'll guarantee you less than half of them would actually be compliant if somebody bothered to test them and check them. Some of them are already leaving the industry. Some of them have already been removed off the list. Okay, so there's 600 devices certified, right? Estimates in Canada, there's going to be somewhere between 15 to 30. That's it. Out of the 600 and some that are certified south of the border. So what if you are a carrier who purchased one of those devices and thought it would be a certified device? The manufacturer told you it would be a certified device. Now you find out in December that guess what? This device you got installed, you can't operate in Canada with that. So if you're a US carrier coming up here, that affects you as well because you now have to have a Transport Canada certified device as well as an FMCSA certified. Canadian carrier will have to meet both standards as well. Anyway, you now purchase that device. You now have 6 months, let's say, to remove that device, research a new one, install it in your truck, and get everybody all retrained on it. And it may already be integrated into your fleet software programs. You have to make all those other changes as well. Or you have a device that does get approved, but it's 10 years old, so you now have to upgrade all the software. Because a lot of people think, well, it's just going to be an over-the-air upgrade. Not every device is going to be an over-the-air upgrade. You're actually going to have to replace some hardware. So 60, 70% might be able to be an over-the-air upgrade, but that leaves 30% that isn't. That's a pretty good chunk. So I think when you take all those things into account, we have to do something to help the industry out and manage what could be chaotic. Road safety, it's the right thing to do. I think it's I've been in favor of it for years. And long before we got here, and I fought for it and been an advocate for it. We got to do it right, and we got to do it in the appropriate timeline. And we can't put 5 or 10% of the industry in turmoil because we're pushing an unrealistic timeline. There's been enough challenges. We're all facing enough turmoil, and we don't need stuff added. As you can tell, and anybody that's heard me speak before, I get a little passionate about this, so it was maybe a longer answer than what you wanted. But
Oh, no, it was perfect. And I saw a couple of questions in the chat. I'm trying to pay attention to you, but one of the questions in the chat that came up for both you and Andrea, what's wrong with the US model of self-certification, basically, if I can paraphrase that question? What's wrong with it? And I'll throw that, let me ask Andrea first,
Okay.
and then we'll come back to you, Mike.
I was actually going to say Mike's probably more familiar than I am, so maybe I'll let Mike take that first, and then I'll add my comments sort of to the end of that piece.
Yeah, sorry, I forgot you represent Canada only, right?
I do.
Mike?
well, what's wrong with the certification model? I'm not saying there's anything wrong with the specifications that they have to meet. There is some different specifications for Canada because we have north of 60 rules. We have different hours of service rules. We have different idiosyncrasies within our legislation that are different. So some changes do have to be made in the devices to make them compliant on both sides of the border. But the biggest issue with the US one, nobody checks up on it. The fact is it's a self-certification model. There's no way there would be 600 approved devices on the market if they had to submit and get certified. And the biggest issue is, and you know, I see the question that the certification is almost 500 pages long. It is a very long process, but nobody verifies that you actually did the test. You submit paperwork that says you've done it. And what did crop up at the start of it was numerous white paper certifications. And for those of you that aren't familiar with what a white paper is, basically, I am going to design a protocol, a set of standards, a bunch of testing procedures. And then I'm going to sell it to you. And all you do is insert your name wherever it's blank. And there was a bunch of those that came out of it. So there was a whole bunch of white paper bodies that got certified. And it was obvious that they were white paper because every submission was the same. It just had, you know, it just had the name of the company changed. Nothing else was different. Which means you had a whole bunch of people who were already in the market who just purchased a white paper off of somebody and then filled in the blanks and submitted it. They didn't run any tests. They're certifying that they ran tests, but nobody verifies if they actually ran a test. They just submit the paperwork. So that is the crux of the problem. Go self-certification. You'll have a massive amount of devices out there that are not compliant. And one of the big issues was some of these devices that are certified south of the border. The goal of this is to improve road safety, make sure that we're following hours of service rules better. There was devices that are approved on the FMCSA certified list that are actually designed to help you cheat. So they were doing the exact opposite of what we wanted the regulation to do. They were designed and set up that they would show an officer legal hours of service at the side of the road, but in behind the systems was your real logs, which were breaking the law. So that is the issue with the certification. There are a few issues. Those are the two things. If we allow devices to be marketed to companies that allow you to cheat, we're actually making them work.
Thanks, Mike. And John, if you could write that down, I'd love to ask you when we get into your session about what the insurance industry is doing with the ELD.
I've made a note.
Yes, okay.
Thanks, Chris.
All right, Mike, will all the FMCSA compliant devices end up being certified? If a device that is already installed is not approved, how problematic is that going to be for a carrier?
Yeah, and I'll make this one brief because I think I already answered most of this in my other diatribes. No, nowhere close to them will be all certified. There's over 600 certified estimates in Canada, or we will see somewhere between 15 to 30 devices certified on this side of the border. The vast majority of them are not going to be certified. And the problematic part, I think I mentioned earlier, you're gonna have a harder issue than somebody who sat, because you're now going to have to remove that device, which may already be installed into fleet software programs. You have dispatch, payroll, everything else integrated into your fleet. We're now going to have that one removed and a new one installed by June 12th of 2020. If you're operating south of the border, you can't just remove it and then throw the new one in. You're almost going to have to put the new one in, get them trained on that, and then remove the old one. It'll be problematic. It'll be a very crunched timeline if we don't provide some sort of extension or enforcement.
Andrea, how problematic do you think your members would find it if certification doesn't happen soon?
Oh, can you hear me? I think you guys are all frozen. Oh, are you coming through? Am I coming through?
Fine, Andrea, yep.
Okay, perfect. I think it's going to be very problematic for a carrier if they have a device that's already installed and it's not approved. As Mike said, you know, we have in the U.S. over 600 ELD devices that are available, and so I think there's always some comments that say, well, you know, if you stick with sort of one of the major ones, you should be good. And so that's an option that some carriers have chosen to take already, so that they're prepared, and that is a piece. But that's a significant investment, and so and it's a bit of a gamble sometimes. And I think with when you're looking at, you know, over 600 approved in the U.S., we're maybe going to be looking at 15 to 30 approved in Canada. The odds are you know, not in your favor to pick one if you do pick one and decide to go ahead right now. And so that's a big investment. And if you have something that doesn't meet that provision, as Mike said, you're going to be required to remove your current hardware. You're going to have to go through that same process of researching, purchasing, installing, training, all of that anyone without an ELD is going to have to, and trying to do things in a compressed time frame is obviously going to come with an economic impact. Oh, you are muted, Chris.
Yeah, Chris is muted.
You have to unmute yourself, Chris.
Again.
Chris is still muted.
Sign up for.
Moderator has muted himself. There you
I
go.
always try to be muted, but my Bluetooth also lost connection for some reason all of a sudden. So I was saying I would like to thank Andrea and Mike for coming on. It was great and insightful. Naveen, do we have some questions that we haven't addressed yet from the chat?
Yes, person named Mir, M-A-V, has, I sent you in a private chat. I agree with Mike. We should have third-party certification in Canada, 100%, but not in order to meet the mandate put forth my TCE and deadline. We can allow temporary self-certification in Canada. So if you can read it, I sent you in your chat box as well.
Yeah, but I'll address that as well, Naveen, for the rest of the audience. Because we have time, so we might as well answer these questions for everybody, I think. The problem with that is actually, I think if you'd be worse off if you're going to allow temporary self-certification, because you're going to allow temporary self-certification if you allow that only until Transport Canada and the Standards Council of Canada has a certification process in place. And then they're going to check up on, and they're likely going to be checked up on before the June 12th deadline gets you. Then you go out and purchase that device because it was on a self-certified list. Then it gets tested and it doesn't qualify. Now it's going to be removed from the list in a very short period of time. So I really don't think it would give you any comfort or satisfaction. And if I knew it was only temporary and eventually they're going to get tested, it's not something I would want to go out and research. The rug could get pulled in from underneath. So if we're going third-party certification, which we are, that's not in question. It's in Gazette 2. This is the way it is. We are going to have third-party certification. We have to stick with that, and it's the right way to go. We just got to be careful.
All right. Andrea, do you have something to add?
My internet just cut out there, so I missed the question. So if you just want to repeat what that question was, I heard the last bit of Mike's response.
Well,
I can do it if you want. It was asking if they agree with third-party certification, but they wondered if to meet the timelines that TC's put forward, we should allow temporary self-certification until the certification process.
Yeah, I think you'd honestly be opening a bit of a can of worms by opening a temporary self-certification there. I think really what we need, as Mike said, I think the certification process is the right way to go. I think we just need to have a timeline for that certification process that's appropriate for to allow industry to be able to be responsive and then get the appropriate hardware into their fleets. And so I think like a temporary option would really only create a bit of a band-aid, and then I think you'd have the chaos of things that were sort of temporarily certified, and then you're going to end up with the same issue probably 6-12 months down the road when you do get a certification body in place. That now all of a sudden you're going to sort of end up with this situation in the US where you're going to have a number of devices that are temporarily self-certified that then don't meet the requirements. So I really think then you just sort of end up and you're just delaying the inevitable at that point. So yeah, that would be my opinion on pursuing that option.
Also, if I can just add another opinion, both of you have said in regards to the length of the extension, it sounds like if the certification process was approved in the fall, you're only asking for an extra few months to be added to the whole process. You're not asking for years or a huge length of time.
No, I'd like to see a year. And you know, that's really less than what we had in the first place. If you look at the Gazette 1 posting, they suggested themselves in the regulation that was drafted. That was put out there after years of consultation with industry stakeholders, such as ourselves, that we needed a 2-year implementation date, followed by a 2-year grandfather period. That was industry's perspective when this put out. And that was the perspective of everybody in the industry that I can think of. I can't think of anybody who was opposed to that originally. Some opposition came in when we got so far behind the US because there was lots of delays in getting the draft. You know, as I say, yeah, we want to get the reg in. Do we want to get it in quickly or do we want to get it in properly? Right. So because of delays that are there, I think we have to adjust it. And you put a regulation in place with the same 2-year period, but you add the certification process, which is the right thing to do. But you really don't have an implementation date when you don't have a certification body in place already when you make the announcement. Right? So we are now less than a year of an actual grandfather. So really we should have the same 2 years that we were told we were going to have in the first place. Right? And we're not even asking for that. We're just asking to extend it by a year because you should be able to do it. And another thing you have to think of, this isn't only problematic to the industry. It's also problematic to some of your suppliers. And now the ELD devices that are out there that are trying to cheat the system, they go bankrupt and out of business. Great, thank you. I don't want you anyway. We want ones that are actual safety partners here that are going to help us out. But there's lots of them out there, and not just your small ones. There'll be some major ones out there who have been in this for a long time that are going to struggle to meet this certification. One thing you have to think of is the more your device does, so this is the regulation and this is the specification that you have to, then manufacturers build extra items into their devices because customers have asked for it. So they put into these things things that'll help you out, options where you have administrative tools and other stuff your driver can add in and out. Well, the more options they put into a device, when the regulation comes out and strips some of those options away, which were completely legal on the US side, but they're not here. Well, that's the more changes that has to be made to that device to make it compliant. So the more complicated and the more things your ELD device does, the more that might have to be changed to meet the certification process. They know what it is, but they're making changes now. And it's not an easy process. So even those, they will meet it, the big ones and the ones that want to, but it's not going to be, oh, the testing procedure's there, bang, I can meet it. There's going to be some work for them to do. And if you're a carrier that's now rushing to meet a deadline, you might be scrambling to put the first few certified devices that hit the market into your truck. Well, now that's a disadvantage to the other ELD suppliers who still plan on meeting the deadline and have been doing the work behind the scene. But if they're not the first one to market and they're not on the list till 2 months after, well, people have already scrambled out and started purchasing.
Right.
And
Oh,
sorry,
sorry.
go ahead. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, maybe just to add to Mike's comments, sort of adding to the pressure of everything right now is obviously in 2020, we're facing the significant economic impact following COVID. And so I think the question is like, is it possible to complete this process in a short timeline? Probably. Will you have significant financial burden to make that happen, both on the supplier side and on the carrier side? Also probably. So I think, you know, if companies were facing this challenge, or suppliers were facing this challenge because of inaction on their part, I wouldn't be pursuing this position, because I absolutely believe that you need to be compliant, you need to be in that place. But I think that this isn't this case, is that we're seeing this situation because of delays from Transport Canada in establishing that certification body. And so I don't think that industry should have to shoulder the economic impact of that delay.
Thank you.
And if I can just, I know we're almost out of time. I do want to say a couple of things. I see a couple of questions in the side. I'll quickly try to answer.
I was going to ask Chris if you can read this chat box and please then address these questions. Yeah.
From Mark, it says, why can't we just follow and use what and who the US did?
I think
And
we've
a
already
follow-up
answered that.
question, yeah, but why are we so far behind?
Yeah, and I think we answered that too. It's because we went to market without third-party certification, then we decided to have it, which was the right thing to do. We didn't have all the processes in place for the testing.
Is there an estimate to how many trucks would be required to have ELDs in Canada? Anybody know? That's a tough question.
I can't say for sure. There's
A heck of a lot.
lots of devices that already have ELDs installed. Question is, how many of them will be certified on this side of the world? I can't say. I think estimates are 80% of federally regulated carriers already have some sort of device installed, but I don't know how many.
Now, one question that I did see in the chat, and I don't see it right now, but have we had any word from the provinces yet as to when they might implement ELDs within their own jurisdictions for intra-provincial carriers?
We work with the CCMTA on this. Us and other associations have encouraged the provinces to adopt it. So we have regulations the same across. We don't have a competitive disadvantage from one province to the other. Most of them have committed publicly that they plan to adopt it. However, I don't believe you're going to see it adopted on the same, I guarantee you won't see it adopted on the same timelines. Most of them are going to wait, I believe, until you see some certified devices on the market. They're going to do consultations within their own jurisdictions. They have the choice of adopting the regulation as it is, or making small changes to the regulation before they adopt it in their province or territory. They're just choosing not to adopt it at all. It sounds like most of them have said they will adopt it, but it definitely won't be at the same time. And it won't be across the board either. Some do it this year, some do it the following. I do want to say publicly though, before we, because it sounds like we're railing on government on this. We as an association and myself have a very good relationship with Transport Canada. I want to make sure that's clear. We don't agree with the timelines on this, but we have worked with them from the start on this regulation. And during COVID-19, we've had multiple calls a week with them. Them and all the other government associations have done great work to help us all out during COVID-19 and worked with us and asked our questions and asked us what we needed, extended deadlines and expiry dates and phased them back in. So I think the industry has worked well with government. And I think we can take that positive and say we've worked well during this before. This was a challenge before COVID hit. COVID has made it an even more challenge to reach. And let's take a cooperative approach that we've worked together and let's find a solution.
I agree absolutely. We're in the same position here too, that we this is not a question of whether Transport Canada has done something wrong or anything else. It's expressing a concern about a timeline and a desire to really have a successful implementation of these regulations. And so it's about setting ourselves up for success here.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Andrea. Chris, do we have a couple more minutes? We have a couple good questions here if our panelists can answer these. And Chris, can we stretch this? John, would you allow us a couple more minutes, please?
Certainly. Absolutely, Nav.
Sure.
One question, do you have any idea who would be performing the third-party testing?
Well, there may be more than one. It's not, I don't know how many you've submitted. I don't have that inside knowledge. I do have a pretty good idea who likely the company's going to be, at least the first one to be certified to be the third-party testing body. However, I don't believe I should publicly say it because it's not a guarantee and there may be some confidentiality issues. But we will have one, from what I'm hearing, in place by September or October.
Another question, just real quick, as many of the US drivers and companies will be crossing borders to Canada, how are they responding to this since the beginning? I guess since hearing about the regulation. Andrea, have you heard anything?
I think there's definitely still concerns in there. A lot of them that have ELDs and have the operations in the US, they're not concerned about this regulation coming in the sense that they already have that hardware installed and you know, feel that they're ready to go in that sense. But I think the biggest question that's in their mind is what they have currently installed going to be certified, as there's no grandfathering provision at this point. And so I think that's what weighs in their mind is waiting to hear if they're on the right track and if they're going to have to go back and replace those ELDs. So that's the concern that I'm seeing from those that transfer across the border right now.
Thank you. Mike?
Yeah, one other, I can tell you one other major U.S. industry association has wrote TC and asked for the same extension, asked for an extension because they share our concern. I can tell you from the start in the CCMTA meetings that, you know, there was support from some people south of the border from this third party certification. They recognized there was an issue down there. There was support that they thought we should go down this route. But I believe there's now concern with timelines, like you said. And just to be clear, even on this side of the border, you know, there may be some that are in support of sticking with the timeline the way it is. But in addition to you know, ourselves, myself and Andrea's association writing to government, there's been at least 3 other associations in the Canadian side of the border who have wrote 2 of them with concerns, but wanting an extension as well. And there's a couple more that may be as well. This isn't the concern of a small segment. This is a concern of a large amount of people about these truncated timelines around.
Well, with that, I think that's a great way to end this for this portion. The Trucking Network would like to thank both Andrea and you, Mike, for coming on and discussing this. And I believe because of the attendance, it is a topic worth discussing. So thank you both so much. With that, we'll move on to John Oldfield from NFP, and we'll talk about the hard insurance market. But before we do that, John, can you give us just a brief background of your few years in the insurance business?
So it's kind of interesting, Chris. So I started trucking back before there were logbooks, before we had maxi brakes. In fact, before we had steer axle brakes. Imagine that. So that was the late 70s. I trucked into the 80s, and I came out of a truck actively in the early 90s and started managing fleets. And I've now been, much to my surprise, in the insurance industry 25 years. Quite something. That wasn't my original plan. It wasn't my original plan. And so 25 years later, I'm still learning, and obviously I'm still challenged. Find myself very fortunate. I get to manage about 100 truck fleets instead of just one now. And so I hope my knowledge is useful for everybody. And so as you and I go back a lot of years, we'll talk about insurance, but we'll also talk about fleet management, you know, how important it is. So if you want me to make a comment on ELD situation, so
I would.
How differently Canadians are than Americans are when it comes to management. And so in Canada, we had the four major suppliers of ELDs, logging devices, some variation. And for the most part, most Canadian fleets stuck with the tried and true, the big four. However, there were some fleets that went and started using some unknown logbooks, I call them. I won't use the word illegal, but I use the term logbooks that were able to be edited for their hours of service by the driver. And so in Canada, we don't wait for the government to take up arms. We actually, in the insurance industry, we're going to talk about that as we go through this, is in Canada, the insurance companies have become the regulators of trucking. And so it was 2 years ago, we convened a meeting, and the insurance company, the few specialty trucking insurance companies you have in Canada, and a couple of especially trucking insurance brokers like myself, we convened a meeting. And we determined, from a risk management point of view, which logbooks we felt, we determined actually, were compliant with the regulations in the US and Canada. And basically then, people are using the other types of logs, but very difficult or impossible to source fleet insurance. So it's a different form of regulation. That's still going on today.
And so, I mean, we won't talk about if you were using one of those ELDs that didn't meet the mandate and you had a serious crash, what that would do to you. But let's get talking about an insurance hard market, because I do believe that is the topic. What is an insurance, or what is a hard insurance market, John?
Yeah. So we use the word hard insurance market because they go in cycles. So I've been in it long enough now, I've seen 4 really hard insurance cycles. And so what that means is insurance rates fluctuate like freight rates do. And it's all supply and demand. And so when I first came into insurance 25 years ago, there were 16 companies insuring trucking fleets. Remarkable. And today we essentially have 4. And of those 4, 2 of the original insurers, of course. You work for one of them, and the other one, of course, was formerly known as Markel, has evolved in Northbridge. And so essentially, insurance companies, they have what's called silos, different forms of insurance they can underwrite to. They can insure house insurance, boat insurance, aircraft, buildings, commercial, a few select trucking. But the division has to turn a profit. So remember an insurance company. An insurance company is vested with capital from shareholders. It is the insurance company's responsibility to protect that capital and turn a return on investment on it. It's that simple. People misunderstand the insurance product, and one of my jobs as a broker and an ex-trucker is explain how it works. So a lot of people envision insurance policies as a bank account where you pay your premium and you think that money's available for claims. That's so far from the truth that it's a complete misconception. And so that's really the role of an insurance broker, and yourself as your former life as a risk manager, was to explain what insurance policies are structured to do and how the premium is actually applied.
Well, one of the things that I ran into a lot, and if you could just explain a little bit about reserves. When I was in, and still now as a consultant, when I meet with clients, they don't understand that a reserve, they think it's in the bank account to be spent any way the insurance company wants. What are reserves?
So a reserve, when an event happens with a truck, it could be contact with a third-party vehicle, could be potential for a cargo claim. And so the insurance company is required by law to post an actual monetary reserve. They have underwriters and actuaries who are very good at doing this, of course. And so what happens when a potential claim occurs, the insurance company has to protect the insured, the trucking fleet in this particular case, against the eventuality it's very possible that an insurance company become insolvent and not able to pay the claim. So you actually have to take that money and set it aside. And if it takes 7 to 10 years to settle the claim, and that's not unusual today, then that money is still in a reserve, ready to be paid out as a third-party liability claim, as a potential cargo claim. And so that's what a reserve is. There's also something that insureds don't understand. There's something called IBNR, the first of the acronyms in trucking. It's called an incurred but not reported claim. And so when a truck fleet's going up and down the road with 100 trucks running in all 48 and 10 provinces, things do happen. And they may seem very minor at the time to a driver, but it could evolve into a claim. We have what's called statute of limitations. The statute of limitations, it could be 2 years from the time of an event until the third party has to actually report the claim. And so as an insurance company collects the data on a fleet, they look at their past claims, they look at all the data they've collected. There's always an amount put into what's called an IBNR fund. That's a forward-looking projection on what the potential for come in the future. And so I find a lot of fleets get hung up, and I've had a good loss ratio for the last 4 years. Why is my premium going up? And the simple fact is projections for the future don't support the past. Either the trucking fleet's changed or the world around them has changed. We know they're all changing all the time.
And, you know, as you were speaking, I just had this thought come into my head, and I don't know if you can answer it or not, John. You know, back in 2011, sorry, when we had that disaster in New York City, reinsurance rates skyrocketed for everybody, all different forms of insurance. In your opinion, could COVID have the same effect on insurance companies and reinsurance companies? And before you answer that, you might want to say what a reinsurance company is.
Yes. And so a reinsurance company is quite simply, you purchase insurance from an insurance company, XYZ. You need a $5 million liability policy to operate in the United States. The insurance company that you're currently insured with may or may not choose to hold that entire $5 million. They can sell actual risk apart. And so very much like a truck fleet, all a truck fleet is doing when they're buying a commercial insurance policy, they're selling risk. And so it's like a poker game. You have 100 trucks hauling steel down in Ohio, coming home from West Virginia, raw materials. You present the profile of your fleet to an insurance company. And the insurance company comes back and says, okay, you need $5 million. I'll see you with that. For $750,000, we'll sell you a policy with $5 million limits and a $10,000 deductible structure and a various policy structure, of course. And so the insurer may say, okay, we're actually going to sell off the top $2 million of that. Right now, it's an interesting time in insurance that we're having extremely difficult time in the US and Canada buying those high limits of insurance. And so that is typically reinsured the high limits. And so when we really get stuck trying to buy high limits from an insurance company, we have to what's called a facultative market. It's a very high cost of insurance to buy facultative limits of insurance. And so for my fleets that require $10 million or $20 million limits of liability to operate in the US, partly due to the fact of the weak Canadian dollar right now. So what in fact is a $10 million Canadian policy worth in a court of law in the United States? Sounds like about 700,000, that's about $7 million, does it? And unfortunately, that doesn't go very far today with our new term called nuclear verdicts.
Yeah.
And so nuclear verdicts are settlements in excess of $10 million. The number of nuclear verdicts over the last 5 years has increased 355%. And so what's the reason for that? And it's the reason for that really is it's emotional. And so the lawyers who are attacking our fleets with lawsuits, they tend to choose juries, trial by jury, that's a wild card. And their job is to see to it that the jury is emotional about the loss. The interesting thing about all the nuclear verdicts in the US, if you read about them and read the fine print, these are all safe fleets. They're very safe fleets. And so why would a jury award a $40 million settlement against a fleet where the driver wasn't liable for the crash? It's emotion. And one other new term for us today, it's called litigation financing. So those 40 and $100 million settlements, if you read the fine print again, you'll find it took years to get to that actual settlement, and years in a court of law, and hundreds of hours of high-priced legal fees cost a lot of money. Who's financing that? It's not the truck fleet, because the lawyers don't want retainers anymore. It's litigation financing. Those are venture capitalists who see profit, the potential for profit in these lawsuits. And so, say your family's involved in a loss somewhere, Chris, in the US, let's just use the US. In one of our favorite counties, Cook County, Illinois, they have the highest lawsuit awards in the country. So yes, insurance companies measure everywhere you travel in the US, even down to the county. And that's why we ask for if the fuel tax reports. And every kilometer you travel in every jurisdiction drives a different rate of liability. So your family's involved in a claim with a truck in Cook County, Illinois. Very quickly, a number of lawyers will contact you and say, Chris, your family's injured, I'll get you money. They almost used the word guaranteed, but it's going to take a lot of time. And so they don't want a retainer. But what they do is they build the case from the information they've received, and they will actually now present the law firm with a finance agreement. So if you want to represent this party against a trucking fleet, we will provide the financing for the potential 7 years we're going to be tied up in courts of law. And so litigation financing wants a piece of the action at the end. The lawyers want a piece of the action at the end. We've all read the articles on how absolutely corrupt now the medical systems are, the chiropractors, the physiotherapists, and everything else. And it's very difficult for us to present information defending the fleet, indicating that all the overcharging done in the background. The jury doesn't really want to hear it. In a lot of areas, it's not admissible in the court of law.
So with that, how has all that affected today's insurance market?
So what's happened now is the potential for loss. And so fleets are worried about the $1 million losses. And so they should be. And it's their defendability in the court of law. It's how prepared they are to defend themselves in the court of law. And so when I take a call for a potential claim, my questions have changed over the last 25 years. So my first question now is, do you have a dash camera? Is the video uploadable right now? That's question number one. And then we start asking about your driver, third party, environmental loss. And there's a lot more factors than there were even 10 years ago now. And so what that's doing now is driving up the cost of insurance dramatically. And so there's a potential for litigation. The cost of the trucks has gone up dramatically. The cost of repairs has gone up dramatically. And most of our trucking fleets operating in the US, the Canadian fleets that is, operate the majority of their miles in the US. And obviously when we're involved in a loss in the US, we're paying in US dollars. But unfortunately, we've got a Canadian insurance policy that's doing the conversion from Canadian dollars to very expensive US greenbacks. And so you take all those factors into consideration, and the cost of insurance has been driven up dramatically. One other thing, the other issue, of course, that's nothing new, it's been around forever, is fraud in insurance industries. And so if you're all on YouTube right now, you can see the number of cars and trucks have been burnt through COVID. And so the people, they'd be able to defer their payments on their trucks and their cars, and they can't anymore. And so unfortunately, they try to defraud the insurance company for a claim. And so you have that sort of fraud. You have the sort of fraud that goes on every day, where people aren't reporting the whole number of trucks, the total fleet size, or whether they're operating correctly. And the last one, which is least understood of all, you'll understand this one, Chris, is the fastest selling truck insurance market for the last 2 years is an insurance company that I hope most people haven't heard of. It's called Facility. And so Facility insurance was designed many years ago with the intention that we would eventually be able to shut it down, that people would learn from going to Facility insurance and do everything they can to get out of it. And so Facility is the insurance of last resort. Whether you're driving your car and you make a mistake and you get caught with impaired, you go into Facility market, or a truck fleet that currently does not meet the risk management standards of any of the regular insurance markets, you have to go to Facility insurance. What most people don't understand is Facility insurance, the premiums are ludicrous if you look at the premium on a long haul truck or a car even. But every year, the Insurance Facility Association posts a loss, a deficit. And so even though they're charging $50,000 a truck, they're still losing money every year because the risks, the actual nature of the risks, the car drivers or truck drivers are poorly managed. And so every year, when the Facility Insurance Association posts an economic loss, all the other insurance companies in Canada who write either cars or commercial trucks have to actually cut checks. They share in that loss, everybody. And so the actual cost of insurance for those of us who are running best-in-class fleets, don't have losses, the underlying cost of insurance continues to creep up for them as well. Because every year, the regular insurers have to cut a check to the Facility Association to offset those losses. And sadly, Facility is the fastest growing insurance market in trucking in Canada right now.
Let me ask you one of there's two questions in chat. How about the dump truck company's insurance? Is there any special challenge due to COVID? And what do you think post-COVID is going to look like for dump trucks?
So let's just talk about dump trucks in general pre-COVID. And so dump trucks in general are a class of business that's frowned upon by insurance companies. Period. There's no better way to put it. They see them as a poorly managed risk. And unfortunately, their loss ratios have proven that true. And if you sat a number of CVORs side by side, take a livestock carrier, a reefer fellow, a flatbed, and a dump truck. The dump truck CVORs, for the greater part, don't mean to paint everyone with the same brush, have been horrible. And a lot of the time, the dump trucks were not regulated. And so the dump truck guys, the ones I looked at, they've gone above and beyond the standards set by Ontario. And they're already running ELDs. They're running axle weight monitors in the trucks all the time. They're running full telematics in the truck. And so if you want to control your cost of insurance, just show me one thing. Show me the fact that you are dedicated to safety, that you're one of the best in class fleets. I don't care then if you're running a dump truck or nuclear fuel. If you can prove to me that you're a best in class operator and be willing to actually prove that to the insurance company as well, there's affordable insurance for everybody out there. And so typically the dump truck operators running the problems aren't best in class operators. The COVID, and so COVID's presented a challenge to everybody. And so through this whole state of the problems we've had, it's interesting. I have a number of my fleets who have had record quarters. I mean, these are fleets been in business 25 to 50 years, record profits. And so what it is to be in the right place at the right time and have managed your employees in a proper fashion. And so if all the trucks go to work during COVID and they're all running profitable freight, you're in a very lucrative spot. Now, if you've chosen to haul, say, auto parts, 100% auto parts, you're definitely in trouble. If you're running all pharmaceuticals, kudos to you, of course. And so what the insurance companies did is they came back with a method to provide what was typically referred to as a park truck rate. So if you're an auto parts hauler running 100 trucks pre-COVID, all the auto plants shut down. If you can actually document the fact that these trucks are parked, you couldn't return the plates, but you could certainly remove the plates and keep them in the office. You can show the drivers are off payroll and on CERB, then the insurance companies are willing to work with credit endorsements. And so it wasn't a uniform approach, but we work with all the major truck insurance markets in Canada, and each and every one of them provided some form of endorsement, a credit endorsement for the COVID, when trucks were genuinely parked.
Well, I didn't know that, so that's pretty cool. Another question from the chat, is there an increase in fraud activity due to business slowdown due to the COVID?
Absolutely. And so we are seeing that. It's where typically, you don't want to point a finger at, but it's typically the owner operators are stretched thin. I take dozens of calls from owner operators that have got truck payments and families to feed, and the fleet they're with is slow or slowed right down, of course. And they're doing desperate things, and they're trying to pull freight at any cost. And so I work with a lot of truck fleets, obviously, and part of the issue with the freight market right now is you have carriers out there that typically don't haul the products they're hauling right now. So imagine if you were dedicated, a number of fleets of this specialize in trade shows. So let's say you've got your entire fleet dedicated to trade show business. It's a wonderful business when it's working, of course, right? But what do they do right now? There simply are no trade shows. So if I was an owner operator who went out and bought a brand new W900 February of this year, and I'm leased on with a fleet that's doing 100% trade shows, I better have my cash flow model in line, because I'm in trouble for cash flow. And so what we typically find, it's typically people who are financially stretched. So what we've seen over the last, it's been more than just COVID, it was before that, there's been a lot of fraud in claims as well. And so a typical fire claim 5 years ago could have been adjusted in sort of 30 to 60 days, depending on the circumstances. Today, it's taking much longer because the insurance company is having to investigate each and every potential claim for fraud. And so that's just our new world. There's fraud in everywhere we look, whether it was COVID related, bad management practices, or just someone had a serious issue with their cash flow model. And so there is an extra step in every claim now. And underwriting, what used to take us sort of 30 to 45 days to underwrite a fleet now, takes months. And so my message to anyone, if you're looking, honestly, do not consider insurance as a right. It's a great privilege. And I manage fleets. We actually manage a number of trucking captives as well. And a captive is basically where the fleet is so well managed that they want to own a piece of the insurance company they're insured with. And so the fleets within the captive have really been unscathed through all this. But it's very tough underwriting to come in. But for someone looking in a regular marketplace, honestly, do the research on the insurance companies, find out who's been in the market for a long time, who's stable. The same thing with the insurance broker. Make sure you have someone who has got background in trucking. And they're more, if you're just looking for a broker to sell you insurance, you've done yourself a disservice. Look for someone who can give you the advice on how to manage the business as well. And then I tell everybody that the renewal process for my fleets, so I'm renewing a large group of captive fleets on August 1st. And you know when I start the renewal process for next year? August 2nd. And so for me, my fleets know after 25 years that the renewal process lasts 364 days. There's only one day when I get off their case. And that is the day that, hooray, we made it, we're renewed, and away we go. So give it lots of time. You will never get a policy in 30 or 60 days nowadays. That will not happen. The process has become very difficult. as you mentioned, the sourcing of reinsurance now. There's a lot more financial scrutiny and claim scrutiny, operating authority scrutiny. There's the fact that the risk management team for the insurance companies are not able to come out and visit the fleet anymore. And that face-to-face interaction was vital. You know, you were involved in that process, Chris, and you went into a fleet and you'd analyze them. A lot of your report was based on your feeling inside the fleet. It still is for me as well. And you were in trucking a long time, and so was I. And as soon as you walk into a fleet, you get a feeling for it now. And so the loss control experts from the insurance companies now have lost that. And so they have to do it through a telephone interview and a collection of material. So it takes a lot longer to do it. And so if your insurance renewal is coming up in 6 months, start now. If it's coming up in 30 days, you haven't started, you're in trouble. It's really that simple.
I wish people would take, if they take nothing else away from this part, you got to start 6 months ahead,
Yes,
minimum for insurance renewal.
Yes.
Now, John, how long do you think this insurance market will remain hard? We only got about just over 10 minutes left, and we've got a few questions in the chat to get to, but how long do you think this is going to remain in the market that we're in?
So I used a hard market cycle, the phrase, just because it's familiar to people. But like we're saying with so many things now, I believe this to be the new normal. And
Okay.
this is the new normal. And so for me, my advice to trucking fleets is the market will always be hard now. And all that means is you have to be razor sharp when you're managing your fleet. And so as long as you're razor sharp managing your fleet and are totally committed to safety, then you will not have a problem sourcing affordable insurance. You honestly won't, of course. And so whatever business you are in, if you can honestly demonstrate that you are one of those best in class, or you have a plan moving towards best in class, there's never an issue sourcing insurance. Honestly, that's it. And so a hard market cycle, whether it's here for not, we're going to call it something else, a new norm. My best managed fleets have always seen insurance as a privilege, and the market as always being hard. And today, they don't have any insurance issues at all. They have a long history with an insurance company that recognizes what they are and supports them with premium and easy claims management.
Perfect. A question from the chat. Are we seeing insurance companies stepping away from the transportation, I guess, market due to nuclear verdicts and dropping out of that market entirely?
Absolutely. And so we've had a number come out of the long haul. So there's a number of markets that have left the industry. They'll look at local cartage, but if you're running, so the ones right now are running the deep south. So I've got a number of my clients, because that's where I came from, is the long haul US stuff. The clients are running that 80% US. So they're on the US Canadian border. So they're based in the peninsula, Niagara Peninsula. They're based out of Leamington, and they're running into the US. They're running 80 to 90% US exposure. There's a very limited number of markets for that. And unless results change for them, then they will be exiting as well. And so there was a time in 1989 when I was running a truck fleet, and we had 2 insurance companies insuring long haul trucking in Canada. You'll know, you remember that, Chris. It was Markel and Zurich. No mistake about it, of course. And I remember managing the fleet and our insurance, so we ran a good fleet and losses were low and everything else, but it was just plain simply 100% rate increase. That was it. And if you couldn't afford it, well, sell it. Try something else, of course. The only thing that's different now is that in today's world, while the insurance rates are climbing, you can't do the same with your freight rates. And that's the unfortunate part. So in 1989, we just go to our clients and go, cost of insurance goes up, so is freight rates. But what's changed dramatically in that market is in 1989, we as the trucking fleets set the rates. That's no longer the case. And to me, that's one of the real issues right now. And so as bad as it is in Canada, as you know, I work for NFP Canada, but we also have a very, very large US division. And so as horrible as the insurance market is here in Canada, it's far worse in the US. The market is fractured. The limitations on insurers, what type of truck fleet, where they can go, is extremely limited. And the premiums are through the roof. And it's basically, some insurers in the US will not insure you if you cross certain states, if you travel in certain states. Because the chance of litigation, the chance of defending a fleet in those states is actually very, very slim, successfully defended.
Wow. Another question from the chat: with the difficulties in the reinsurance markets, are those captives not finding it harder to get higher limits, and some captives only able to offer limits of less than 5 million?
So yes, and so every captive right now, so a captive, I can't tell you this in 5 minutes, but a captive is a series of layers. And so what we've done in our captive is we restructured our layers to allow the remaining reinsurers to come in at a top level where we need them. And so unlike most insurance policy, a captive we build from the top down. So, okay, what limits you need? All right, we go out and we source that top limit to come down. And then what is the premium you're willing to pay to run a truck fleet? And what we look at then is when you get to the bottom, we're going, okay, here's how much is left for our, we call them frequency and severity layers within our captive structure. Is there enough money in there to fund the potential future losses? And for that, we use something called loss picks, which are the future potential losses assigned to the fleet by an actuary. So people see insurance premiums as sort of an underwriter sitting at his desk throwing darts at the board. Eh? Well, that might have been 40 years ago, of course. But today it's a scientific adventure with a whole pile of math and a lot of people involved with it. And so to get a simple question answered, we have to go through many layers of actuaries and underwriters. And as you know, a lot of the underwriters in Canada, senior underwriters, even their authority is being restricted down, what they're able to underwrite and limits they can underwrite, because they have people to answer to at the reinsurance companies, either in North America or a lot of times in Europe now. That's why we need so much lead time insurance.
As you know, a good friend of mine is a senior underwriter, and I'll tell you, they're operating under strict rules. And if they don't do what, it's so different from 6 years ago when I actually worked there. But I got another question for you. This is from Chris Harris. With the attempt at the moment, and I think eventually it's going to be a successful attempt, to change the insurance regulation in the US to up the minimum amount of insurance. As you know, currently it's 750,000.
Yes.
They want to take it to 2 million, of course, US dollars.
Yes.
We're already in a very tough market.
Yes.
How do you think that's going to affect things in the near future? Because I do believe that's coming probably not before November of this year, but shortly after. I would bet within a year of that election, that'll happen. How do you think that's going to affect things?
That's an excellent question. Very timely.
Thank you.
And yes. And so it's going to change everything. And so I insure a number of fleets in the US, and even our ability to get $2 million coverage in the US is extremely limited. And so you've already seen the number of truck fleets go out of business in the US because they couldn't afford insurance. So what is this going to do? And so for a Canadian carrier, that's particularly troublesome. So I try to advise carriers that if you're traveling in the US and all you can afford is $2 million Canadian limit, that's about $1.2 million in the US, don't travel in the US. Just don't do it. And so what has to happen is all the carriers in Canada right now, there's a double whammy. And so can they afford the additional $1 million limit on top? The other question is, can their primary insurer even offer the 3 million Canadian dollars required to meet the $2 million US minimum limit? So not only the truck fleets are worrying, the actual primary insurance companies are looking at this as well. It's going to change their entire underwriting model. Make no mistake about it, this is long overdue. For a truck fleet to operate with a limit of $750,000, most right $1 million, to we as Canadians who are risk averse for Americans, It's ludicrous actually, but there's a lot of fleets in the US operating with $1 million US coverage. And it's surprising how many fleets operate in the US, Canadian fleets, with only $2 million coverage. That is honestly, that's a gamble I would not be willing to take myself personally. But then I've been in insurance for 25 years. I've seen the result of not purchasing adequate limits on a commercial truck policy.
John, we just got a few minutes left. There's a question in chat I'd like to get to, and there's one last one here that I'd like to ask. What are the best strategies for truckers to survive the hard insurance cycle?
So the best strategy is simple. It's make a plan and stick to it. I tell everybody that being a best managed fleet isn't about being smart or anything or the bravest. It's about discipline. It's discipline. And so the best managed fleets do simple things. They set policies in place, review them continuously, and they analyze every month. As my best run fleets, every 30 days, they run a CVOR, they run an SMS, they ask me for a loss history. We do driver turnover. We do what's called high risk driver profiling. So if you're running 100 trucks, I can always identify 20 high risk drivers. It'll be different from fleet to fleet. And so all you do is keep managing the risk expectations of the fleet. Keep improving every month. If you can prove you're doing that to an insurance company, and you'll see the changes. There's a direct correlation between loss ratios, CUR and SMS, driver turnover, and high-risk driver management. If you manage all those, your loss ratio will start to come down. I'm very fortunate. I manage fleets with 100 trucks. We just did a captive renewal, and I have fleets running 100, 130 trucks, high U.S. exposure, multi-axle, and Canada. And they literally knock on my wooden table here. They literally have no losses. Their CVORs are down at single digits or low teens. The rest of the mess is invisible. And all that shows a level of dedication. It's that whole thing. You're dedicated to managing loss every day, every month. And once a month, measure whether you're going in the right direction or not. And so I always find it interesting, the fleets that pull a CVOR or an SMS or a loss run once a year and are surprised whether they're having issues getting insurance. It's no wonder. And so, when you work at an insurance company, they measure the results every day. They measure the results shortly every month. And if they can't expect their partners, their trucking fleets, to do the same thing, why would they insure them?
All right, we got 2 more questions. So I need you to keep these answers short because we're right at the end here. There's some trucking insurance brokers that I respect. And of course, Mr. Johnny O, you're one of them. But we have a question from Lisa Arsenault, another trucking insurance broker specialist who I have a great deal of respect for. What if it is impossible to secure excess of 2 million? Should the fleet just shut down?
There's ways to it. I have a greatest respect for Lisa too. Thanks, Lisa. And so what I typically do, about my personal approach is go to facultative insurance. And so I've always been able to procure facultative insurance for anybody. And the cost is ludicrous. We've seen the cost of umbrella insurance and excess policies lately. Lisa knows that. And so we renewed a whole big group of them, and the cost went up 2.8%. Not 2.8, 2.8 times. But I've seen facultative insurance cost 6 times more than a regular umbrella market. And that's just the fact. And if they can't afford, if the facultative with this high cost of excess, it's not forever. These markets will normalize, of course. So everybody, can you afford this for 1 year? If you can afford these high costs for high limits, right? Then what we got to do is get in there and work on managing your risk control processes so we can find a more affordable excess market.
Right.
Good question, Lisa.
Oh, thanks, John. Mr. Mike has a question for you. Mike Millian.
Mike.
Yeah, John. So, as you mentioned at the start, the cost of facility are out of control. And facility is there for a very good reason. I believe it should exist for a good reason. But the issue with it is it's being abused fairly. No. And I guess my question for you, and ask for your comment, would be is, we have bad trucking companies in this industry, and if they want to operate unsafely and can't afford insurance, I'm fine with that. Please away. The issue is, as you know, we also have bad insurance brokers in this industry.
Yes.
Help trucking companies perpetrate fraud so they can get their money, because they go on sales. So they help the companies lie to the insurance companies. They will underreport how many trucks they have. They will underreport how many miles they go. They'll underreport whether they operate into the US or not, or whether they haul dangerous goods. And the issue with this is the entire industry ends up paying for this, including the good trucking companies and the good insurance companies. So how do we fix this to get rid of the fraud so the trucking companies that are operating good can stop suffering and not being able to pay more than their fair share? And so the insurance companies themselves can stop losing money, and maybe we get rates back.
On that front, I have some good news for you. And so there has been a task force in place for quite some time. We were involved, and the standard insurance markets were deeply involved as well, because they're financially committed as well. And so there's a large reform package coming out, a facility reform package next month in August. It's coming quickly. So we know who the fleets are, we know who the brokers are, and it'll all be dealt with. It's highly regulated, of course, and so everyone has to be treated with the same processes, of course. And so you're going to see a lot of articles being written about the reform in the facility auto insurance market starting next month. So we're almost there. So for a heavily regulated industry, the one thing I must comment on is the speed at which Facility Association was able to adapt to this and put the reforms forward. It was, in the insurance industry, it was lightning fast.
I think that's a great way to end that part, John. Johnny O from NFP, thank you so much. Andrea, all the way from Calgary, had to get up early this morning to join us. Thank you so much. Well, and Mike from PMTC, thank you. Nav, I would like to turn it over to you for the parting comments. Thank you all for attending.
Thank you, Chris. You did an amazing job, and you drilled all the questions and to make them answer everything we needed. And I think it was a great information we shared with our attendees, and very useful. And both topics, ELD, compliance date, and the insurance part, both are a very important part of trucking for any business. And great information shared today. Want to say thank you to everybody, to all, especially to our panelists, to our attendees. We are no one without our attendees. You know, we can talk more. And I believe we need to do one more webinar, John, on this insurance topic.
Yes, I know. So we'll talk about doing something in September. How's that sound?
I think that's quite far. I will talk to him personally in a private talk if we can bring it a little bit earlier. Great topic we are going to talk. And the next week, another webinar we will be talking about is in-cab training, safety and best practice. So we have great panel again for next week again. Kim Richardson, Charlie Columbus. Kim Richardson is TTSU president. Charlie Columbus, he is in IHSA and public relations and on their speaking front. And then we have Concrete Ontario president, Mr. I forgot his name, my bad. I'm so sorry. I think it's Bert Canters, if I'm not wrong. And we will be, again, we are looking at great numbers, great attendance today and for the next webinar again. Wanna get back to Chris for the closing remarks.
I would just like to say thank you to Naveen and the Trucking Network for getting this panel together to address the two topics. And hopefully we'll see you again next Thursday at 10 a.m. for the in-cab training topic. Thank you all for attending.
Thank you
For having me on.
For having us.
Take care.
Thanks. Bye-bye now.